My name is Aamir, and I never thought I'd be the one telling a story like this. I've always been a man of logic, grounded in faith and tradition, not prone to wild imaginings or superstition. My life was simple: work hard, provide for my family, pray, and live according to the teachings I'd grown up with. But everything changed one cold, rainy night. It's a memory so vivid it plays in my mind like a movie, every detail sharp and unrelenting. That night, I encountered a truth I could never have anticipated, a truth I am compelled to share. Though I know many will doubt me, some will reject me, and a few might even hate me for it. But I don't have the luxury of staying silent. It had been a grueling day at work, the kind where the hours drag on endlessly. By the time I left the office, night had swallowed the sky and the rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the streets into rivers of shimmering black. I remember gripping the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles aching as I navigated the slick roads. My thoughts were elsewhere, weighed down by guilt. My son had begged me to stay home that morning to help him with a school project, but I'd brushed him off, promising we'd do it together over the weekend. My wife had looked at me with her quiet disappointment, the kind that doesn't need words. I told myself I was doing the right thing, sacrificing for their future. But deep down, I wasn't so sure anymore. The road was eerily empty, just the glow of streetlights reflected in puddles and the occasional flash of headlights passing by. I was tired, bone-tired, and the rhythmic pounding of rain on the roof only made it worse. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, there was a flash of light, far brighter than any oncoming car. It blinded me for a split second, and I instinctively slammed on the brakes. My tires screamed in protest, and then I felt it, a jarring, bone-rattling impact. Metal crunched, glass shattered, and for a moment I was weightless, suspended in a cacophony of chaos. Then silence. But it wasn't just silence. It was an all-encompassing stillness, as though the world itself had paused. I was aware of my body, or rather the absence of it. I felt light, unburdened, as if I were floating in a vast expanse of nothingness. The rain, the cold, the pain, all of it was gone. Instead, there was warmth, a radiant, all-encompassing warmth that seemed to wrap around me like a comforting embrace. I tried to speak, to call out, but no words came. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't like the harsh glare of the headlights or the fluorescent glow of streetlights. This light was soft yet brilliant, illuminating everything and nothing at once. It didn't just shine, it pulsed, alive with an energy that seemed to resonate deep within me. I felt drawn to it, an irresistible pull that I couldn't, and didn't want to, resist. As I moved closer, the world around me began to shift. The light grew brighter, and with it came a sense of profound peace, unlike anything I'd ever known. It was as if every worry, every regret, every burden I'd carried my entire life had been lifted in an instant. But even as I reveled in that peace, a part of me knew this was no ordinary experience. I was no longer in the world I'd known. That's when I saw them, figures emerging from the light. They weren't like people, not in the way we understand. They radiated a beauty and majesty that defied description, their forms shimmering with colors I'd never seen before. Yet, despite their otherworldly appearance, they felt familiar, like old friends I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One of them stepped forward, and as I gazed into his eyes, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. "Aamir," he said, his voice both a whisper and a thunderclap. "You are not here by chance." I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. He smiled, a smile so full of love it brought tears to my eyes. "You have questions," he said, as though reading my thoughts. "And the time has come for you to find answers." Before I could respond, the light around us began to change. It was no longer soft and warm, but sharp and piercing, revealing things I could scarcely comprehend. I saw scenes from my own life, moments I'd long forgotten, moments I wished I could forget. But they weren't just memories. They were lessons, laid bare in a way that left no room for denial or excuses. I saw myself as a child, learning to pray at my father's side, the pride in his eyes as he guided me through the verses. I saw the joy on my mother's face when I fasted for the first time during Ramadan. But I also saw the times I'd let anger consume me, the moments I'd chosen pride over humility, and the countless ways I'd allowed fear to dictate my actions. "You have lived with sincerity," the figure said, his voice gentle but firm. "But sincerity alone is not enough." I felt a pang of shame, a deep ache in my soul. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, though the words felt weak and small in the vastness of that place. "You will see," he replied, and with those words the light shifted once more. This time it revealed something far beyond the scope of my life, a vision of the world itself, a tapestry of humanity in all its beauty and brokenness. And in the center of it all was a truth that shook me to my core, a truth I had never considered, yet one I could not deny. The vision unfolded like a story told in flashes, each scene more vivid and profound than the last. At first, I saw the world as it is, teeming with life, overflowing with both beauty and chaos. Cities bustled with energy, people hurried through their lives, their faces etched with determination, joy, or sorrow. Nature thrived in its quiet majesty. Waves crashed against rugged shores, forests whispered with the wind, and mountains stood as eternal sentinels against the sky. It was all achingly familiar, and yet I could feel the cracks beneath the surface, the unspoken pain that wove through it all. Then the scenes began to change. The light dimmed and shadows crept in. The beauty of the world was marred by greed, hatred, and division. I saw people turning on one another over differences of belief, wealth, and power. Families were torn apart, communities crumbled, and hearts hardened. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The figure beside me spoke, his voice steady yet tinged with sorrow. "This is the world as it has become," he said, "but it is not as it was meant to be." I turned to him, desperate for answers. "Why are you showing me this? What am I supposed to do about it?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he extended his hand, and as I looked into the light emanating from it, the vision shifted again. This time, I saw something far more unsettling. It was as though the fabric of reality itself was being unraveled. People wandered aimlessly, their eyes fixed on glowing screens, their faces devoid of expression. The world around them faded into a gray, lifeless void as they became consumed by the devices in their hands. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "A deception," he said, his tone grave. "One so subtle, so pervasive that even the faithful will struggle to see it for what it is. They will trade truth for convenience, connection for isolation, and purpose for distraction." The weight of his words pressed down on me like a heavy stone. I thought of my own life, the hours I'd wasted scrolling through my phone, the moments I'd missed with my family because I was too preoccupied with meaningless distractions. It wasn't just a warning for the world, it was a warning for me. But before I could dwell on it, the vision shifted once more. This time the light grew brighter, illuminating a figure standing at the center of it all. At first I couldn't make out his face, but as I drew closer, I felt an overwhelming sense of awe and reverence. His presence was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, powerful yet tender, majestic yet approachable. "Aamir," the figure said, and the sound of my name on his lips brought me to my knees. There was no mistaking who he was. Though I had never seen him before, I knew him in the depths of my soul. This was Jesus. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. All I could do was weep, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of his presence. He knelt before me, taking my hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring, and filled with a love so pure it brought a fresh wave of tears to my eyes. "You are loved," he said, his voice a melody that resonated deep within me. "More than you can imagine, but the time has come for you to understand the truth." "The truth?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What truth?" He looked at me with an expression that was both compassionate and piercing, as though he could see every corner of my soul. "You have walked with faith and sincerity," he said, But faith without truth is like a journey without a destination. You have sought God with all your heart, and now He has brought you here so that you might see. I felt a conflict raging within me. I had always believed in God, devoted myself to prayer, fasting, and charity. Yet here I was, confronted with the possibility that there was something more, something I had not yet understood. Jesus continued, his voice steady but urgent. The path you have followed has brought you to the threshold of truth, but it is not the fullness of it. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. I wanted to protest, to cling to what I had always known, but deep down, I couldn't deny the power of what he was saying. It wasn't just his words, it was the overwhelming sense of love and peace that radiated from him, a love that felt infinite, unconditional, and utterly transformative. I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. I've tried to live a good life, to honor God. Why am I being shown this now? Because you have been chosen, he said, his gaze unwavering. Not to abandon what you have known, but to fulfill it. You have been given a gift, Aamir, a glimpse of the truth so that you might share it with others. The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of unworthiness. But why me? I asked. I'm just an ordinary man. Who would believe me? He smiled, a smile so full of understanding and encouragement that it dispelled my doubts, if only for a moment. It is not your strength they must believe in, he said. It is mine. As he spoke, the light around us grew even brighter, and I felt a warmth spreading through me, filling me with a sense of purpose I had never known. The vision began to fade, and I felt myself being pulled back to the world I had left behind. No, I whispered, clutching at the light. I'm not ready. You are ready, he said, his voice echoing in my soul, and I will be with you always. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my chest heaving as the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital came into focus. I was back. But I was no longer the man I had been. The moment I opened my eyes, the weight of the physical world came crashing down on me. Pain rippled through my body, sharp, immediate, grounding me in reality. I heard the distant beeping of monitors and the muffled voices of doctors and nurses, but all of it seemed secondary to the burning sensation in my chest, as if the light I'd just left behind still lingered, trying to reach out to me. I blinked through the haze, and the first thing I saw was my wife's face. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her hands clutching mine with a desperation that matched the trembling in her voice. Aamir, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're alive. Thank God you're alive. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw, every word catching like gravel. The room spun as I struggled to ground myself, the memories of what I had just experienced surging to the forefront of my mind. The light, the figures, the overwhelming love in Jesus' eyes. It was all still so vivid, as if I hadn't truly left that place. Don't try to talk, she said, her fingers brushing my forehead. You've been through so much. You almost didn't make it. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the implication. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. The accident, the crash, the way my car had spun out of control, somehow I had survived. But even as I lay there, weak and broken in that hospital bed, I knew I wasn't the same. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my thoughts. But instead of calm, I was met with a torrent of emotions, gratitude for being alive, confusion about the vision I had seen, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I had been shown something extraordinary, something life-changing, but now I was faced with the impossible task of reconciling it with the life I had known. The next few days were a blur of recovery. Doctors came and went, their faces blending together as they checked my vitals and whispered about how miraculous it was that I had survived. My wife stayed by my side, her quiet strength a constant anchor. My son visited too, his small hand gripping mine as he asked me, with wide, innocent eyes, if I was going to be okay. I will be, I told him, forcing a smile. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was true. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain, it was the silence. The nights in the hospital were long and quiet, filled with nothing but the sound of my own thoughts. And every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that place, standing before Jesus, his words echoing in my mind. "You have been chosen. You have been given a gift, Aamir." What was I supposed to do with that? How could I, an ordinary man with a simple life, possibly share something so profound, so controversial? My faith had always been my anchor, but now it felt like the very foundation of my beliefs had been shaken. On the third night, unable to sleep, I reached for the Quran on the bedside table. My fingers trembled as I flipped through its familiar pages, the verses I had known by heart since childhood suddenly taking on a new weight. For hours, I read and prayed, searching for clarity, for some sign that what I had experienced wasn't a betrayal of my faith but an extension of it. But the clarity didn't come, not right away. Instead, I was met with more questions, each one gnawing at the edges of my mind. Why had I been shown this vision? Why had Jesus spoken to me, a Muslim man? And what was I supposed to do now? It wasn't until I returned home that the magnitude of what I had been through truly hit me. My family tried to shield me, insisting I focus on resting, but every quiet moment felt like an eternity. The world outside felt distant, almost foreign, as if I no longer fit into it. I avoided telling anyone about what I had experienced, even my wife. How could I possibly explain it? How could I put into words something so sacred, so overwhelming, without sounding insane? Yet the burden of keeping it to myself was unbearable, a weight pressing down on my chest with every passing day. Finally, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My wife and I were sitting on the couch, the room filled with a heavy silence. She had been watching me closely, her concern growing with each day that passed. "Aamir," she said softly, placing a hand on my knee, "I know something is weighing on you. Please talk to me." I took a deep breath, the words caught in my throat. "There's something I need to tell you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something that happened when I died." Her eyes widened, a mixture of fear and curiosity flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, the enormity of what I was about to say hanging between us. "I saw something," I began, my hands trembling as I spoke. Or rather, I had a vision. I was in this place, this incredible, indescribable place, and Jesus was there. He spoke to me. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a moment she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "Jesus." "Yes," I said, my throat tightening. He told me things that I don't even know how to process. About truth, about faith, about what's happening in the world. And he said I was supposed to share it." Tears welled in her eyes and she reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. "Aamir," she said, her voice trembling, "what does this mean for us, for our faith? For everything we've built our lives on?" "I don't know," I admitted, the weight of my confession pressing down on me. "But I know one thing for certain. I can't ignore what I've seen. I can't pretend it didn't happen." The room fell into a heavy silence, the enormity of my words settling over us. For the first time in my life, I felt both completely unmoored and deeply, profoundly called to something greater. And though I didn't yet know what that something was, I knew I couldn't run from it. Not anymore. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds. On one side was the life I had always known, routine, structured, grounded in my faith and family. On the other was the unshakable truth of what I had seen, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet define. Every step felt precarious, as if one misstep would send everything I'd built crashing down. I spent hours each day in prayer and reflection, seeking answers that felt just out of reach. The memory of Jesus' words echoed constantly in my mind. "You have been chosen, not to abandon what you have known, but to fulfill it." What did that mean? How could I reconcile this vision with the faith I had practiced my entire life? I tried to carry on as normal, but it was impossible. At work, my mind wandered. At home, I found myself withdrawing from my family, consumed by the weight of what I had experienced. My wife grew more worried with each passing day, but she didn't push. She gave me space, though I could see the questions in her eyes, the silent plea for me to let her in. The turning point came one evening when an old friend, Yusuf, came to visit. Yusuf was someone I had grown up with, a man of deep faith and wisdom. He had a calming presence, the kind of person you could sit with in silence and still feel understood. When he heard about my accident, he insisted on coming to see me, saying he couldn't rest until he knew I was okay. As we sat in my living room, the weight of the past weeks pressed heavily on me. Yusuf noticed. He always did. "You've been quiet," he said, his voice gentle but probing. "More so than usual. What's on your mind, brother?" I hesitated, my heart pounding. Could I tell him? Would he understand? "There's something I need to share with you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to say it. I don't even know if you'll believe me." Yusuf leaned forward, his expression calm and encouraging. "Try me," he said simply. Taking a deep breath, I began to tell him everything. From the moment of the crash to the blinding light to the presence of Jesus and the vision he had shown me. I spoke of the love and peace I had felt in his presence, the urgency of his message, and the deep conflict it had stirred within me. As I spoke, Yusuf listened intently, his expression unreadable. When I finally finished, the silence that followed was deafening. My heart raced as I waited for his response, bracing myself for disbelief or judgment. But when he finally spoke, his words took me by surprise. "Aamir," he said slowly, "what you've experienced is not something to take lightly. Visions like this, they are rare and they are given for a reason." His calm acceptance caught me off guard. "You believe me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I believe," he said, "that you have been shown something profound. And while I don't claim to fully understand it, I know this. God works in ways we cannot always comprehend. Perhaps this vision is meant to challenge you, to deepen your faith, or to guide you towards something greater." His words brought a measure of comfort, but they also raised new questions. "But what am I supposed to do with this?" I asked. "How do I reconcile what I've seen with everything I've believed?" Yusuf leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. "That is something only you can answer," he said. "But I can tell you this. Faith is not a static thing. It grows, it evolves, and sometimes it is tested in ways that force us to confront truths we never expected. The question is not whether you can reconcile it, but whether you are willing to seek the answers, no matter where they lead." His words stayed with me long after he left, stirring something deep within me. That night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I found myself praying with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. Not just for answers, but for courage. The courage to face whatever lay ahead, to embrace the truth no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. In the days that followed, I began to open up more, first to my wife and then to a few close friends. Each time I shared my experience, I felt a little lighter, as if the burden of carrying it alone was being lifted. But I also faced skepticism. Questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't dispel. Some dismissed it as a hallucination, a byproduct of trauma or oxygen deprivation during the crash. Others listened politely but changed the subject, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a Muslim man claiming to have had a vision of Jesus. And then there were those who reacted with outright hostility, accusing me of abandoning my faith, of betraying everything we stood for. It was painful, but it was also illuminating. For every door that closed, another seemed to open, and slowly I began to see the threads of a larger plan weaving through it all. I realized that this wasn't just about me. It was about something much bigger. One evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my home, I found myself drawn to the Bible. It was a book I had rarely touched, one that I had always viewed with a sense of distance. But now, as I opened its pages, I felt an undeniable pull, as if the words were calling out to me. I began to read, and what I found there both challenged and comforted me. The teachings of Jesus, his emphasis on love, forgiveness, and truth. They resonated with something deep within me, something I couldn't ignore. And then I came across the verse that would change everything. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Those words hit me like a thunderclap, their meaning sinking deep into my soul. For the first time, I began to understand. This wasn't about abandoning my faith. It was about fulfilling it, just as Jesus had said. It was about seeking the fullness of truth, even if it led me down an unfamiliar and uncomfortable path. That night, as I knelt in prayer, I made a decision. I didn't have all the answers, and I still had doubts and fears. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't turn back. The vision I had been given wasn't just a message, it was a calling. And I was finally ready to answer it. The decision to embrace what I had experienced didn't bring immediate clarity or peace. In fact, the days that followed were some of the hardest I had ever faced. The weight of my calling, the questions it raised, and the isolation it caused left me feeling like I was walking a solitary path. But deep inside, a flame had been lit, a sense of purpose that kept me moving forward, even when the road felt impossible. I began to share my story more openly, but not without hesitation. It started with small gatherings at my local mosque, where I cautiously spoke about my near-death experience. I didn't frame it as a conversion or a betrayal of my faith, but rather as a profound encounter with something greater than myself, a truth that transcended labels and boundaries. At first, the reactions were mixed. Some people were intrigued, their curiosity evident in the way they leaned in to listen, their eyes searching mine for sincerity. Others were skeptical, their questions tinged with disbelief or suspicion. "Why you?" one man asked pointedly after one such gathering. "Why would God choose you to have such a vision?" I didn't have an answer, and for a long time that question haunted me. I wasn't a scholar or a saint. I was just an ordinary man, flawed and imperfect. But the more I reflected on it, the more I realized that perhaps that was the point. If God could use someone like me, someone who had made mistakes, doubted, and struggled, then maybe the message was for everyone, not just the pious or the learned. But not everyone saw it that way. As word spread about my story, the backlash grew. Some accused me of blasphemy, of abandoning Islam for the sake of attention or notoriety. Others warned me to stay silent, to stop stirring controversy. The whispers turned to open criticism, and soon I found myself ostracized by people I had once considered friends. The hardest moment came when my local imam, a man I deeply respected, called me into his office. His expression was grave as he gestured for me to sit. "Aamir," he began, his tone heavy with disappointment, "I've been hearing troubling things about you, about what you've been saying." I nodded, bracing myself for what was coming. "I know it sounds strange," I said carefully, "but I promise you I'm not trying to cause division. I'm only sharing what I experienced." He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Do you understand the weight of your words? You're walking a dangerous path, my brother. These claims, this vision you speak of, they can lead people astray. They can lead you astray." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they came from a place of concern. He wasn't trying to condemn me. He was trying to protect me, to steer me back to the safety of the familiar. But I couldn't turn back, not now. "I understand your concerns," I said quietly, "and I respect your wisdom, but this isn't something I can ignore. I've seen too much, felt too much. If I stay silent, I feel like I'd be denying the truth." The imam sighed deeply, his expression softening. "I don't doubt your sincerity, Aamir, but sincerity doesn't always equate to truth. Be careful, that's all I ask. Be careful." I left his office feeling more alone than ever, but also more resolved. The path I was walking was fraught with challenges, but every step I took felt like it was bringing me closer to something greater, something undeniable. As time went on, I began to notice changes in myself. My prayers became deeper, more intimate. The words I had recited for years took on new meaning as if I were discovering them for the first time. The Quran and the Bible, once separate in my mind, began to feel like two halves of the same whole, their messages intertwining in ways I had never imagined. I started keeping a journal, writing down everything I could remember from my vision, every word, every image, every feeling. The process was cathartic, helping me make sense of the overwhelming experience. But it also brought new revelations, as if the act of writing was unlocking layers of meaning I hadn't initially understood. One night, as I was writing, a verse from the Bible came to mind. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." The words resonated deeply, echoing the message I had received during my near-death experience. Jesus had spoken of love, of unity, of breaking down the barriers that divided us. And suddenly, I realized that my calling wasn't to choose one faith over the other. It was to bridge the gap between them. The realization filled me with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. For too long, I had been caught up in the fear of what others would think, in the need to defend myself against accusations and doubts. But now, I saw that my purpose wasn't to argue or convince. It was to love, to listen, and to share the truth as I had experienced it, trusting that God would guide the rest. The next morning, I called Yusuf and told him about my revelation. His response was simple but profound. "Then that is what you must do, Aamir, and you won't do it alone." With his encouragement, I began organizing small interfaith gatherings, bringing together people from different backgrounds to share their stories, their struggles, and their faith. At first, the turnout was small, a handful of curious individuals willing to set aside their differences for an evening. But over time, the gatherings grew, the conversations deepening with each meeting. What amazed me most was the common ground we found, the shared longing for connection and understanding. People who had once viewed each other with suspicion began to see each other as brothers and sisters, united by something greater than their differences. And through it all, I felt the presence of the one who had called me to this path, his words guiding me like a beacon in the darkness. "You have been chosen, not to divide but to unite, not to condemn but to love." For the first time, I felt at peace, not because all my questions had been answered, but because I had finally embraced the journey, trusting that the one who had begun it would see it through to the end. The momentum of the interfaith gatherings grew faster than I ever anticipated. What started as a small, almost hesitant gathering in my living room had expanded into a community effort. People of all faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, even those who claimed no faith at all, were coming together, not to debate or argue but to share. It was beautiful, humbling, and deeply transformative. But as the gatherings grew, so did the scrutiny. Members of my mosque, members of the larger Muslim community, even local church leaders began to take notice. Not all of them were pleased. Some viewed our efforts as an erosion of tradition, a dilution of faith. Others saw it as a threat, something that challenged the barriers they had worked so hard to preserve. I'll never forget the day I received the letter. It came anonymously, slipped under the door of my home in the early morning. The words were sharp, written in heavy strokes that betrayed the anger of the writer. "You are misleading the people. You are betraying your faith. Stop now or there will be consequences." The threat was clear, but the pain it caused cut deeper than the fear it instilled. I had always known this path would be difficult, but to be seen as an enemy by those I had grown up with, those who shared my faith, was a wound I hadn't anticipated. That evening, as I sat with the letter in my hand, Yusuf came over. I hadn't told him about the note, but he could see the strain in my face. "What is it?" he asked, sitting down beside me. I handed him the letter without a word. He read it slowly, his expression darkening. When he finished, he folded the paper neatly and set it aside. "Aamir," he said, his voice calm but firm, "this is fear speaking. Fear of change, fear of losing control, but fear is not the voice of God." I nodded, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. "What if they're right?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What if I'm leading people astray? What if I'm wrong?" Yusuf placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip steady. "None of us has all the answers," he said. "But I know this. You're walking the path you were called to walk. That doesn't mean it will be easy. It doesn't mean you won't face opposition, but it does mean you're not alone. And it does mean it's worth it." His words brought some comfort, but the doubts lingered. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words of the letter looping endlessly in my mind. I prayed, desperately seeking clarity, seeking reassurance. And then, as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I had another vision. It began with darkness, a void so vast and consuming that it felt like I was sinking into nothingness. But then, out of the darkness came a single light, soft and warm. It grew brighter, stronger, until it filled the space around me. And in the light I saw people, faces I recognized, faces I didn't. They were reaching out to each other, their hands clasping, their voices rising in harmony. And then I saw him again. Jesus, standing at the center of the light, his presence radiating peace and love. He looked at me, and though he didn't speak, I heard his voice in my heart. "Do not fear, for I am with you. The truth will prevail." I woke with tears streaming down my face, the vision still vivid in my mind. The doubts that had plagued me were still there, but they were overshadowed by something stronger, a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. The next morning, I shared the vision with my wife, who listened with quiet intensity. When I finished, she took my hand, her eyes filled with both concern and unwavering support. "Whatever happens," she said, "we'll face it together. You're not alone, Aamir." Her words gave me the strength to continue even as the challenges mounted. The anonymous threats didn't stop, but neither did the growing interest in our gatherings. More and more people were coming, not just to listen, but to participate, to share their own experiences and perspectives. And amidst it all, something incredible began to happen. The lines that had once divided us, lines of faith, culture, and belief, started to blur. People were finding common ground in their shared humanity, their shared desire for connection and understanding. One evening, as I watched a Muslim man and a Christian woman exchange stories about their faith journeys, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. It wasn't just about the gatherings or the discussions. It was about the relationships being formed, the walls being torn down. But the challenges were far from over. One night, after a particularly heated gathering where tensions had flared between a group of attendees, I found myself questioning whether we were making a difference at all. Were we really building bridges, or were we just stirring up more division? As I sat alone in the quiet of the night, I remembered the words of Jesus from my vision. "Do not fear, for I am with you. The truth will prevail." And in that moment, I realized that the path forward wasn't about perfection. It was about persistence. It was about continuing to show up, to love, to listen, even when it felt like we were taking 2 steps back for every step forward. The road was long and it was far from easy. But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I began to see the fruits of our efforts. People who had once been strangers, or even adversaries, were becoming friends. Conversations that had once been filled with tension were now marked by empathy and understanding. And through it all, I felt the presence of the one who had called me to this journey, guiding me, sustaining me. His words were a constant reminder. "You have been chosen, not to divide, but to unite. Not to condemn, but to love." The path was still uncertain, but for the first time, I felt at peace with the uncertainty. I didn't have all the answers, but I didn't need to. I was walking in faith, trusting that the truth would prevail just as it always had. As the gatherings continued to grow, the message began to ripple outward, beyond our small community. People who had attended shared their experiences with others, and soon I started receiving invitations to speak at churches, synagogues, and community centers. The first time I stood in front of a church congregation, I felt a wave of apprehension. Would they see me as an outsider? Would they reject the words I felt compelled to share? But when I looked out into the sea of faces, some expectant, some curious, some skeptical, I realized that the doubts weren't theirs, they were mine. The fear of rejection was a remnant of my own insecurities, not a reflection of what these people felt. Taking a deep breath, I began to speak, sharing my story with as much honesty and vulnerability as I could. As I spoke about my near-death experience, the encounter with Jesus and the message I was given, I could see the emotions ripple through the room. Some people nodded, their expressions softening with understanding. Others wiped tears from their eyes. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. Then, a man in the front row stood up. He looked to be in his 70s, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "I've been a Christian my whole life," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "But I've never heard the message of Jesus delivered with such clarity and conviction. Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters." His words stayed with me long after I left that church. It wasn't about converting people or proving one belief system right over another. It was about pointing people back to the heart of what faith was meant to be: love, unity, and a shared longing for something greater than ourselves. But even as the impact of the gatherings grew, so did the resistance. The threats became more direct, the opposition more vocal. One evening, after an interfaith event that had drawn a larger crowd than ever before, I returned home to find graffiti scrawled across the front of my house. "Traitor." My heart sank as I stood there, staring at the harsh red letters. My wife came to stand beside me, her hand slipping into mine. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to her, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. "We keep going," I said. "We don't let fear dictate what we do. This message is too important." And so we pressed on. Each gathering, each conversation felt like a step forward, even when the opposition tried to push us back. I began to see the resistance not as a sign of failure, but as a testament to the importance of the work we were doing. Change was never easy, and it often brought discomfort. But discomfort was the soil in which growth could take root. One night, as I prepared to speak at another event, I received a call from Yusuf. His voice was steady, but I could sense the concern underlying his words. "Aamir, I've been hearing some troubling things," he said. "There are people who are starting to see you as a threat. You need to be careful." "I know," I replied, my voice calm but resolute, "but I can't stop now. Too much is at stake." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Yusuf spoke again. "Then I'll stand with you," he said. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." His words brought me a sense of comfort and strength. I wasn't alone in this journey, even when it felt that way. The people who stood with me, who believed in the message we were sharing, were a constant reminder that this wasn't just my calling. It was a collective effort, a movement toward something greater. As the weeks turned into months, the gatherings became more than just events. They became a community. People began forming friendships that transcended religious and cultural boundaries. Acts of kindness and solidarity emerged, small but powerful gestures that spoke to the heart of what we were trying to achieve. One day, after a particularly moving gathering, an older woman approached me. She was quiet and unassuming, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I've been coming to these events for a while now," she said, her voice soft but steady. "And I just want you to know, you've changed my life. I used to see people who were different from me as something to fear, but now I see them as brothers and sisters. Thank you for opening my eyes." Her words brought tears to my eyes. It was moments like these that reminded me why I had chosen to continue, despite the challenges. The message wasn't just about what I had experienced, it was about what it could inspire in others. But with every success came new challenges. The threats didn't stop, and there were times when the weight of it all felt like too much to bear. I often found myself praying late into the night, seeking guidance and strength to keep moving forward, and every time I felt the same reassuring presence, the same voice that had called me to this path. "Do not fear, for I am with you. The truth will prevail." That truth was my anchor, my guiding light in the midst of the storm. It reminded me that the path I was walking wasn't about me. It was about something far greater, something that had the power to transform lives and bring people together in ways I could never have imagined. As the days went on, I began to see the fruits of that truth more clearly. The barriers that once divided us were beginning to crumble, replaced by bridges of understanding and love. And in those moments I knew, without a doubt, that the journey was worth it. One evening, as I sat at home reflecting on the journey so far, I received an unexpected visit. It was from an old friend, a man I had once considered close, someone with whom I had shared many conversations about faith, life, and everything in between. His name was Farid, and though we had lost touch over the years, I knew him well enough to understand that when he arrived, it meant something was weighing on his heart. I opened the door to find him standing there, his expression serious, his eyes shadowed with a burden I couldn't immediately place. "Aamir," he said quietly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." I motioned for him to sit down, my mind racing. Had something happened to the gatherings? Were the threats escalating again? Had someone turned on me? Farid sat down across from me, his hands clasped together in front of him, and I could see the weight of what he was about to say in his face. He hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to say this, but I've been hearing things," he began, his voice low. "People are starting to talk. They're saying you've gone too far. They're saying you're straying from the path." I felt a tightness in my chest as his words sank in. The familiar tension, the familiar fear that had always accompanied these types of conversations settled back in. But I refused to let it control me. "What kind of things, Farid?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Some say that you're no longer following the true teachings, that you're blending too many different beliefs together, that it's dangerous, that you're confusing people." He paused, looking down at his hands. "Some say you're being led astray, that you're not even Muslim anymore." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not Muslim anymore. The thought seemed impossible. I had spent my entire life as a Muslim. My identity, my faith, my very being had been wrapped up in it. But still, I couldn't ignore the sting of his words. Farid's eyes met mine. "Aamir, I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here because I'm worried about you. I know you and I know what you're trying to do. But this path, it's dangerous. It's not just the people outside who don't understand you. It's the people closest to you who will start questioning your sincerity." I swallowed hard, struggling to find my voice. "I never intended to hurt anyone," I said, my voice trembling. "I just want to bring people together. I want us to find common ground." Farid leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I know you, Aamir. I know your heart. But be careful. This isn't just about unity. This is about truth. And truth, my friend, is not something that can be watered down. You can't mix everything together and expect it to work." I sat back, his words ringing in my ears. Was he right? Had I made a mistake? Was I risking my own salvation in pursuit of something that could never truly unite us? The fear that had been growing in the pit of my stomach threatened to consume me, but I pushed it away. I couldn't let that fear stop me now. "I don't have all the answers, Farid," I said quietly, "but I know what I've seen. I know what I've experienced, and I believe with all my heart that there is a way for us to come together, to see the beauty in each other's faith. I've seen it and I can't turn my back on it." Farid sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I understand your passion, Aamir, but don't let your heart cloud your judgment. I'm telling you this because I care about you. But if you continue down this path, I fear it could destroy everything you've built." His words hung in the air between us, a silent warning that I couldn't ignore. But deep down, I knew that I had to follow the path that had been set before me, no matter the cost. "I hear what you're saying," I replied, my voice firm now, "but I've seen the truth. I've been given a message and I'm not going to stop. I can't." Farid didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stood up, his face a mixture of sadness and resignation.